Hello there and welcome back to the Net Report. Chris here, and we've already made it to the conference finals. It feels like just yesterday the NBA playoffs started, and we are now already down to just 4 teams remaining in the playoffs as a whole. And throughout the journey, there have been a ton of upsets and surprises we were not expecting along the way. So in this video, I'm going to be giving you my 5 biggest surprises in the postseason so far. And if you're new to the channel and enjoy NBA content, hit that like and subscribe button. It helps the channel grow, and it'll keep you up to date with our newest NBA content. And the first big surprise I have on this list is the Phoenix Suns getting swept by the Minnesota Timberwolves. And nobody really expected the Minnesota Timberwolves to sweep this Phoenix team. This was a Phoenix team that, of course, revamped their roster. They had the big three of Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and they were expected to be huge contenders this season. They traded a lot of assets to get Bradley Beal, and to get swept by Minnesota was just a huge shocker. Many expected them to go deep into the playoffs and to be real contenders this year, but that just simply was not the case. This was a Phoenix team we saw remain competitive last year despite its limited depth, and that was on the backs of Kevin Durant and Devin Booker. They absolutely carried this team in last year's playoffs. They took the eventual champion Denver Nuggets to 6 games in the semifinals. However, this year, it was the complete opposite. The Timberwolves dominated them in every facet of the game. Their defense was incredible. Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards were a huge part of that on the perimeter. And the big three really struggled immensely, and it was a huge reason why they lost so convincingly. Devin Booker, outside of Game 4, where he did drop 49 points to be fair, only averaged 20.3 points per game in the series through games 1 through 3, shooting 43% from the field. And that was a big reason why they fell down 0-3. He really didn't look like himself throughout those games. He's typically a playoff riser. However, he really struggled throughout this series. He was being absolutely hounded by Jaden McDaniels, and that was why in big part he struggled throughout this series. Kevin Durant, another guy who's typically a playoff riser, was probably the most impressive and consistent throughout this series, especially out of the big three, but he averaged 26.8 points per game on 55% from the field. However, he still had rough games throughout the series, such as Game 2, where he scored only 18 points on 6 for 15 shooting. And with this Phoenix team, where the big three is your big focal point on offense, you really need a guy like Kevin Durant to consistently step up and drop you 30 to 35 every game, and that just did not happen. And most importantly, Bradley Beal, their big offseason acquisition, only averaged 16.5 points per game, way below his season averages on 44% shooting. And that just simply was not enough to help this Phoenix team overcome the odds, especially with the limited depth. They had to rely on guys like Royce O'Neal and Eric Gordon, and that just simply was not enough throughout this series. When you combine the lack of depth that this Phoenix team has with the big three not being able to shoulder the offensive load, it's no surprise that Timberwolves were able to sweep this team. This was a Phoenix team that was going to need its big three to shoulder the offensive load. They were going to need Kevin Durant to consistently drop 30, Devin Booker to drop 30, and Bradley Beal to at least drop 25 plus to really be able to have a chance, especially with their limited depth. And that did not happen. And without the big three really showing up like they needed to, it's tough for this Phoenix team to really win playoff series, let alone playoff games. The next big surprise I wanted to talk about was the Minnesota Timberwolves defeating the Denver Nuggets, and overall just the emergence of them as a real playoff contender this postseason. They of course started the postseason, like I stated earlier, sweeping the Phoenix Suns, and they beat the Denver Nuggets, last year's NBA champions, in 7 games. And it was in really dramatic fashion, and this team has been led by their defense. Jaden McDaniels, who has been an absolute perimeter savant throughout this entire series and the season as a whole, just named to all defensive second team. Anthony Edwards, who was giving Jamal Murray the work throughout the Denver Nuggets series, and overall just a very underrated defender. Not many people talk about that with his offensive ability. They've had Rudy Gobert as an interior presence for 2 years now at this point. There's a reason he won the Defensive Player of the Year. That's because he's the best interior defender in the league. And this team has just overall been incredible, especially on the defensive side of the ball. They have had other players step up as well, such as Karl Anthony Towns, really getting rid of the narrative that he's a playoff choker, showing what he can do throughout this postseason. They've had Naz Reid step up as well, who has just been absolutely incredible, especially in late game situations. That was seen in Game 7, where he just had a ton of really impactful plays that helped them ultimately win that Game 7. And overall, what's been most impressive is just how the Timberwolves have gotten to this point. They of course swept the Phoenix Suns like I mentioned earlier, but they came into Denver and won the first 2 games on the road, absolutely shocking the defending NBA champions and the NBA world as a whole. Nobody expected them to come in and win those first 2 games, and they ultimately won the series in 7 games, which many did not predict at all. And this whole playoff run by the Minnesota Timberwolves has been absolutely highlighted by the emergence of Anthony Edwards. His leadership has been incredible. He's had multiple 40-point games. He's had averages of 28.9 points per game, 6.2 rebounds, 5.9 assists. He's had almost 2 steals per game. And he's been overall just their main leader and just absolutely phenomenal. He is the main reason and main driving force as to why this Timberwolves team is in the Western Conference Finals right now. If it wasn't for him, this Minnesota team would not be where they are right now. And it's been really fun to watch Anthony Edwards and this young Minnesota team grow together throughout this postseason, because they've truly been one of those fun stories throughout this postseason. The third big surprise I wanted to talk about was the Dallas Mavericks making it to the Western Conference Finals. This was something many people did not expect heading into the season. However, they're now in the Western Conference Finals. They, of course, beat the LA Clippers in round 1 in 6 games, and then in round 2, they defeated the OKC Thunder in dramatic fashion in 6 games. And the craziest part about this run is this has been largely predicated by their defense, contrary to what many people thought about the Mavericks heading into this postseason. Their defense has been extremely stellar this postseason, and it's been led by a lot of guys just giving a lot more effort than we've seen typically. Luka Doncic has been incredible throughout these playoffs, especially with his effort on the defensive end of the floor. We've seen other players as well give a ton of effort, such as Derrick Jones Jr., PJ Washington, that we typically don't see give a ton of effort, and it's really culminated in this Dallas team just playing great defense, and that combined with great rim protection from Derek Lively, Daniel Gafford, has really made this defense kind of turn overnight to a really great defense that many people weren't anticipating heading into this postseason. It has truly been a team effort defensively for the Dallas Mavericks this postseason, and when you combine that with the offensive greatness of a Kyrie Irving and a Luka Doncic, it's no wonder they've made it all the way to the Western Conference Finals this year. Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving are not only showing that they can coexist at the highest level, but they're showing they're able to thrive off of each other and win playoff games, which is something many people had questions about before the season, but they are proving all the naysayers wrong. This has all culminated in the Dallas Mavericks reaching their second conference finals in 3 years, which many did not expect coming into the season, especially after the disaster of last season. So it's been a huge success for the Mavericks, and time will tell if they're able to reach the NBA Finals. The fourth big surprise I wanted to bring up was the Indiana Pacers making it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals. They beat the Milwaukee Bucks in the first round and proceeded to beat the New York Knicks in the second round. And while it is fair to give them their credits, it's also fair to bring up they've had a lot of help along the ways. They beat the Milwaukee Bucks, who were without Giannis Antetokounmpo, Damian Lillard, even Chris Middleton got injured later on in the series despite playing through a lot of it. And then the Knicks just did not have any sort of a healthy roster. Almost their whole team was injured by the end of the second round, but kudos to the Pacers for showing up, because they didn't play down a competition and they've made it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals as a young team. That is something to be commended. While the Pacers are receiving a lot of flack for beating injury-riddled teams, their offense has truly been incredible this postseason. Pascal Siakam has been great for a large majority of the postseason, absolutely amazing in the first 2 games of that Milwaukee series and overall just that series in general. Miles Turner has been one of the more underrated players throughout the entire postseason that nobody's really talking about. And Tyrese Halliburton, despite some inconsistencies, really helped put away that Knicks series and was a big reason why they ultimately ended up winning the series in Game 7. That combined with guys like Andrew Nembhard, Aaron Nesmith stepping up, it's no wonder this offense has been almost unstoppable in the playoffs. This is a Pacers team that has never really been known for their defense, but when their offense is on, it is on. We saw this in Game 7, of course, against the Knicks, where they shot an incredible 75% from the field in the first half. Overall, I believe it was 67%. They just could not miss a bucket, and it didn't seem to matter what New York did throughout that game. And they've had games like that where they are just absolutely on, and they are very hard to stop. Despite a lot of narratives going around about this Pacers team, I think it is fair to give them their credit to some extent. They are a young team that showed up when given the opportunities. Yes, there were injuries in front of their path, but what were they supposed to do? Lose because those teams got injured? No, they took the reins and they ended up winning those series like they were supposed to. So shout out to the Pacers. Their offense has been incredible, and this young team's finally getting that playoff experience that's so valuable for young teams. And the last big surprise I wanted to bring up has sadly been the sheer amount of injuries throughout this postseason. We of course just saw the New York Knicks battle a flurry of injuries throughout their postseason run, ultimately losing to the Pacers in round 2 of the playoffs due to the sheer amount of injuries they had. They, of course, had Bojan Bogdanovic, who got injured in Game 1 against the Pacers. They had OG Anunoby, who was out multiple games due to the hamstring. They had Julius Randle, who was out most of the season. You had Mitchell Robinson, who was out for most of the playoffs. And then to add insult to injury, on top of all of that, you had Jalen Brunson fracture his hand in Game 7 while they were already down a ton, just to put the nail in the coffin for this Knicks season. That was really decimated by injuries. And unfortunately, due to all these injuries, many teams ended up falling short of expectations. You, of course, had the Bucks, like I mentioned earlier, who fell short due to missing Giannis Antetokounmpo the whole series and Damian Lillard for multiple games. They end up losing in the first round for the second year in a row due to injuries. The Heat, of course, got gentlemen swept due in large part to not having Jimmy Butler the entire series. You had other major injuries throughout the league, such as Kawhi Leonard being out once again in the playoffs, and that led the Clippers to losing in the first round in 6 to the Dallas Mavericks, and the injuries just kept piling up from there on out. You had Donovan Mitchell miss multiple games in the Boston series. You had Joel Embiid, who was hobbled all throughout the 76ers Knicks series. You've had Kristaps Porzingis, who has also been out multiple games throughout this playoff run. There's just been so many injuries throughout these playoffs, and it's caused a lot of teams to underachieve and eventually get eliminated, which is always saddening because we want to see high competitive basketball at the highest rate, and when certain players are out, that just isn't the case. It has been sad to see all the injuries throughout the postseason so far, but that is unfortunately the way it goes sometimes. But let us know in the comment section below what you believe was the biggest surprise so far in this postseason. Regardless of what happens, we will be seeing one of either Luka Doncic, Anthony Edwards, Tyrese Halliburton, or Jason Tatum win their first ring, which is very exciting for the sport as a whole. As always, thank you for watching, and if you enjoy this type of NBA content, hit that like and subscribe button. It helps the channel out a ton. Once again, thank you for tuning in, and have a great one.